Hey everyone, if you didn't see it, my last video was a celebration of the 2018 Tony Awards, where I sang a song from each of the nominated musicals for Best New Musical of 2018. And today I kind of wanted to share with you my process creating the medley from beginning to end, step by step, all the way from deciding that I wanted to do a Tony Awards medley to uploading it 2 days before the Tony Awards aired. If you're not familiar with my channel, hello, I'm Jacob Sutherland. I do a lot of song covers, primarily a cappella, but not always a cappella. I do songs from movies, video games, TV shows, and musical theater. If that sounds interesting to you, check out my other videos. Maybe subscribe if you want to subscribe. And without further ado, let's dive right into this video. The very first step in creating this Tony Awards medley, the very first step was choosing the content. So I knew I wanted to do a Tony Awards medley, but to be able to do a medley of songs from musicals that were nominated for Best Musical, I had to know what musicals were nominated for Best Musical. So after May 1st, when they made that announcement, I knew that I was working with Mean Girls, The Band's Visit, Frozen, and SpongeBob SquarePants. So now I want to choose a song from each show that has a good energy, that hopefully together they'll create a good arc. And I want each song to be representative of each show that it's from, so that it's very familiar and keeps people interested and keeps people engaged. After listening to The Band's Visit, I pretty quickly knew that the best song for my vocal range and for the a cappella format was gonna be Answer Me, which is kind of right near the end of the show. Everyone in the cast joins in, so it felt like a good representation of the show. For SpongeBob, I almost immediately knew that I was gonna want to do Bikini Bottom Day, which is the beginning of the show and the end of the show, so it kind of bookends the stage adaptation pretty clearly. It's very high energy, would be a very good, fun, high energy thing to add to the medley. And with the other two, I had a little bit of a dilemma. When the Tony Award nominations were announced on May 1st, Frozen and Mean Girls didn't have their full studio cast albums released yet. With Frozen, I knew I could work with the songs from the animated movie, but because this is a Tony Awards medley and a Tony Awards celebration, I wanted to do something that was from the stage show. Luckily for me, at that point, they had released 4 different videos of songs that were written for the stage adaptation, and out of those 4 songs, the pretty clear choice was Monster. So I got Monster for Frozen. And then with Mean Girls hadn't released anything except for I'd Rather Be Me, and I could work with that, but it was my only choice, and I was hoping to at least be able to hear something else from the show before putting it into the medley. And again, luckily, just a few days later, they released the audio for Apex Predator, and as soon as I listened to that, I was immediately like, yes, this is gonna work great for a cappella. It's got these long, nice, sustained chords. It is a really fun, high-energy duet, and it's gonna slot in perfectly. So Apex Predator is chosen for Mean Girls, and I have my 4 choices. Step 2, I'll call crafting the arrangement. With 4 very different songs, I want them to flow as naturally as possible from one to the other. I definitely wanted to begin and end with a high-energy song, and I wanted to keep it interesting all the way throughout. I didn't want any parts that were boring in any way. So I tried to choose the most interesting, engaging section of the song, whether it was a verse and a chorus, or a bridge and a chorus, and chose each chunk of which song from which musical I'd be doing. As for the order, pretty early on, I decided that I wanted Bikini Bottom Day from SpongeBob to be the end of the medley, the big finale. It has a really great energy to end on. And then thinking about it, Apex Predator flows really well into Bikini Bottom Day if you kind of end with Apex Predator, hey, hey, in the world renowned. So after thinking about that, I wanted Apex Predator third. Then if I want to start with something high energy between the remaining 2, I'm definitely going to want to start with Monster, which puts Answer Me in slot number 2. So now I've got the order of songs of my medley. I've got each of the sections of the songs of the medley chosen. And the next thing to focus on is transitions. But I knew that for Monster and for Apex Predator, they are both way out of my vocal range. So I knew I was going to need to transpose them down, and that was definitely going to affect the way that the transitions work. So before really diving into the specifics of the transitions, I decided to actually get into the arranging, the 6-part arranging of each song, and then after shifting the keys to where it would fit in my voice range for both Monster and Apex Predator, then I'd be able to kind of craft the transitions most effectively. So the next step was actually creating the 6-part voice arrangement for each song. I think for the purposes of this video, I'll just focus on one. I'll focus on Apex Predator, and I'll show you what I did on Logic. The next step was creating the full 6-part arrangement. I wanted to do that to mirror what I had done for the 2017 Tony medley. So I've got a lead part, a tenor 1, tenor 2, baritone, bass, and the 6th part was vocal percussion. The very first thing that I do when arranging a medley like this is to just listen to the song over and over again and figure out the melody. I'll figure it out and I'll plunk it out on the piano. Here's the MIDI track of just Katie's lead vocals. School, gotta keep things cool with the Apex Predator. The next thing I would do is add bass, but because this was such a strong duet sort of number, the next thing I did was add Janice's part to the duet, and I put that in the tenor 1 line. So together, Katie and Janice's Then the next step after the melody, and in this case the harmony, I always put the bass line, and I try and get it as accurate to the original as possible. And especially in an arrangement like this, where I want everything kind of accurate and reminiscent of the original, I try and get the sound of the original as closely as possible. So I figure out the bass by listening to it and then add it in. With this song, the thing I realized was the bass just plays a D throughout the entire chord progression. So where usually I can use the bass to judge where the root of the chord is, with this song the bass was just Ds all the way through that whole part. So I went to the piano and I just listened to the song, figured out the chord progression by ear, and learned that the first chord is a D major, but then the second chord that has a D in the bass is an F major with a D in the bass. The third chord was a C major with a D in the bass, and the last chord there was a G major with a D in the bass. Once I figured out that those were my bass notes and those were the chords, I was able to use the remaining 2 voices I have to fill in all of those chord voicings. So here, with the bass and the tenor 2 and baritone, to fill out the D major chord, I've got D, A, and the F sharp. And then the next one, F major, I've got C and F here with the D in the bass. Then to communicate the C major chord, I've got a C and a G with the D in the bass. And then finally ending it with the G major, I've got G, B, and D in the bass. So the whole chord progression with just the chords and not the lead vocals sounds like this. And then repeat it. And altogether, those 5 parts laid out on my piano MIDI track sound like this. And then it finally moves on to another section, which again, I started with Katie, then I added Janice. And then the next thing I did was add the bass, so it sounds like this. And then with the rest of the chords filled in from the tenor 2 and the baritone, the whole next section sounds like this. And then I transitioned into SpongeBob, knowing that I am not going to be able to sing it that high and I don't really want to shift it a full octave down. I transposed the whole thing, got my purple Mean Girls section here, transposed all of it down to where it fit more naturally in my voice range and to where it flowed well out of the previous song. So I got it down to there. And it ended up in a place where I'm going to end up belting a high A, which is at the very, very top of my range. So now, shifted down, it sounds kind of low, but it fits much more comfortably in my voice range. But you're kind of pray. Jesus, what a day with the apex predator. Then, after figuring out the 5 parts, the next step was recording the vocals. The first thing I recorded was the bass. I left the MIDI track on and sang and recorded. Disable all of the effects, and we just have me singing along with the MIDI track. Here's my recording, and I used the flex pitch tool to tune each of the notes. With the bass part, I tuned it pretty strongly so that each of those notes could be just as accurate as possible when building the bass of the song. And then the next thing I did, I doubled the bass, and in the low bass I shifted everything down a full octave. Then I added an EQ that cuts about there, and on the high one I have it cutting off everything lower than this point, and together they have a really big, solid, booming sound that sounds like this. And that's where the power of the bass comes from. So now, after the bass line has been recorded, I recorded 2 solid takes of each of the other parts. 2 takes of baritone, 2 takes of tenor 2, 2 takes of tenor 1 usually, but because this was Janice, I did a solo for Janice in Apex Predator. The rest of the parts, though, they're doubled up. Thinking ahead, I'm going to want to choose syllables that are appropriate for each of these chords. So with the big, long sustained chords in the tenor 2, I chose to use ah and then some bum-bums near the end. So before any effects, they sound like this. And that's with the bass. And then with the baritone as well, with all the effects, EQ and reverb and everything. Got 2 takes of baritone. They're panned to the left and to the right a little bit. These are panned to the left and right a little bit. The next thing I recorded was the lead vocals, adding some compression, some EQ, and some reverb to the lead vocals. She doesn't know yet, no, she doesn't know yet. She's the queen of beasts at this beastly school. Gotta keep things cool with the apex predator. And then I recorded just 1 track of the Janice part, which I put in tenor 1, and it sounds like this. She's the queen of beasts at this beastly school. Gotta keep things cool with the apex predator. And that's all 5 of those parts. So I've got 1 track of melody, I've got 2 tracks of bass, which is just the 1 take that's doubled and octave shifted. Then I usually did 2 tracks of tenor 1, but because this song had a solo in it, this is the tenor 1 solo, then 2 tracks of tenor 2, panned left and right, baritone 1 and 2, and left and right. So yeah, I used flex pitch on all of my vocal tracks. I used it a lot less on the lead vocals than I did on a lot of the backing vocals because I wanted the harmonies to be as tight as possible, but I didn't tune them so extremely that they didn't still sound natural, like you can see where there's a lot of variation, vibrato in the pitches in certain places. Then, the very final thing, the very last thing I added was vocal percussion. So my process with vocal percussion, I listened to the track again a lot. I figured out what would work best just kind of by playing around, by doing like a... And then after doing that, I recorded a quick scratch take of the vocal percussion and then started copying and pasting a bunch of samples of each of the different sounds that I have. So for every time that I made a kick drum sound, I took these 2 samples that I have of me making a kick drum sound. So this one right here is a kick drum sound that I have with a little bit of compression and channel EQ. And then this kick drum is a much boomier, echoier kick drum. That one's got some reverb as well as compression and a different EQ. And then together they sound like this. So that's my solid kick drum sound. I did the same process, layering in some snare sounds. These are all sounds that I've made, but just that I've kind of picked the best sample of and copied and pasted. And then you add some cymbals. And then I also added some tom sounds. Like, and like, admittedly, that part is layered enough that I wouldn't be able to do that live. I layered a bunch of sounds with the but I'm not a good vocal percussionist, and I just wanted it to sound as good as possible, and so it's not live vocal percussion, but that's what it sounds like altogether is. And then that with my vocal parts, baritone, tenor, bass, and lead vocals, sounds like this. She's the queen of beasts at this beastly school. Gotta keep things cool. And then I just had to adjust the balance between each of the voices. I added reverb and EQ to a lot of them. I added a little bit of compression to some of them. Usually when I send these songs to stores, I have either a friend master it, or I have an online service like Lander master it. But with this, since I know it's just going to be on YouTube, I'm not distributing it to stores, I just did a quick master on my own, and then I exported it, and the song is all done. The audio is completely done. So after I've got everything mixed, mastered, all the audio is completed, the very final step was to create the video, and I knew that one would be pretty simple. It wouldn't take a lot of time because all I really needed was one full clean take of each of the 6 parts, and I slot them into their places on my grid, and then the video is completed. Honestly, the most time-consuming part of the video was actually creating the signs that I used, and I had Emma's help with that, so it didn't take nearly as long as if I had only done it myself. Then after some quick edits, quick color correction, I published it with 2 days to spare. I got it online on Friday with the Tony Awards 2 days later on Sunday. And that was it. That was every step. Thank you so much for watching. If you have any questions about this whole process, let me know. If there was anything that I did so incredibly terribly that it was painful to watch, let me know. If you want to scold me for vocal percussion being an afterthought in my process, you can do that too, I guess. And again, if you haven't watched the final product, the 2018 Tony medley that I created, now that you know how it was all done, go watch it. I think it'll be a lot of fun to watch after knowing the process. And then check out my other videos. I've got my 2017 Tony Award medley, I've got some other musical theater stuff, and I've got a whole bunch of other stuff that hopefully you'll love. I've got more acapella stuff coming up, I've got more musical theater stuff coming up. I think you'll really like it. I'm excited to share it with you. And until my next video, thank you so much for watching, and goodbye.